Well, we are the Knoxville History Project. Our mission is to research, preserve, and promote the history and culture of Knoxville, Tennessee, which surely you all know by now. But I want to put a plug in. Obviously, it's the holidays are on us, and if you're looking for gifts, whether to put in your own stocking or somebody else's, we have our series of books, and we just signed off on ordering more historic Knoxvilles today. So we have about 350 copies left, which means we have sold about 6,000 of these puppies since 2018, and 3,000 will be here in January. So I think we can claim that it is a local bestseller. Of course, our historian Bearden hasn't sold as many copies. No surprise, being there's a fewer people that are interested in it. But if you haven't read it, we encourage you. It's a fascinating place that really belies just driving through there on Kingston Pike. Both these are $24.95, 204 pages of color and great narratives and research from Jack. It's been almost 12 months, I believe, that our Downtown Knoxville book came out. I guess one slight flaw in it is that some people think they already have it when they don't, because there is a similar book about Knoxville, but this is just focused on downtown Knoxville. So if you think you have it, you may not. So if you haven't bought it recently, might want to check that out. 184 pages, 184 photographs of downtown from its inception in 1791, probably through the early 80s. And of course, we have Laura Stahl online with us tonight. Her book, A Fair Shake, The Leaders of the Fight for Women's Rights in Knoxville, is about a year out, but we have copies, and so does she. So that's another great item. Encourage you to read that. Of course, some of our staples that we sell, Jack's Old City book, which he did on his own with Robin Easter for Randy Boyd, and his greatest hits. We have a new stack of them just arrived today. Knoxville's this obscure, prismatic city. I think it's about a dozen of Jack's stories from about 10 years ago. And then we have our Knoxville book and all our other little booklets that you can pick up on our website for $10.95, as well as our still popular and lovely playing cards. We're not greeting cards, playing cards with Kaz Walker as the Joker, as well as the White Mule, ghostly White Mule of Gay Street. And we have a set of 10 postcards. There's just 4 of them. If you're looking for a little stocking stuffer there, you can get all these online. On our website, knoxvillehistoryproject.org. We encourage you to, it is the season of making donations. We like to think in the nonprofit world. We appreciate if you donated this year. If you consider it a gift, we will gladly accept it to help fund this amazing organization that we all believe in. You can also take a tour. We encourage you to take a tour every month with Laura Stahl down on the streets downtown. You can go to knoxvillewalkingtours.com. This program, our Zoom series, is supported in part by a federal award that we got through the Arts and Culture Alliance and the City of Knoxville from the Department of the Treasury. So thanks to all those to help support this ongoing program every month. That's me done. I'm going to hand it over to Jack, who's going to introduce our new speaker for us tonight. Excited.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm much privileged to introduce the lady who's made all of these things happen over the years. The woman behind the curtain has been Nicole Stahl, our administrative coordinator, and she has been part of our whole Zoom history for the last quarter decade now that we've been doing this. And we're grateful for her help with a lot of things, and for the first time with helping with a presentation. She's done a lot of research into an organization she's very close to, the Girl Scouts of America, and its associations with Knoxville. And it's a very interesting story that I didn't know very much about. I've learned a lot from Nicole from working with her on this presentation, and it's one that we have some connections to. Our friend Lynn Fugate, a good supporter of Knoxville History Project, and her husband has been our former treasurer on the board of directors, but she is the CEO of the regional Girl Scouts of America. So if you know Lynn, tell her you saw us talk about her favorite organization here tonight. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Stahl to talk about the Girl Scouts of America in Knoxville, and which are celebrating their centennial this year. So Nicole. Welcome.
Thanks, Jack. So as he said, I'm typically behind the scenes, so I'm going to go ahead and say forgive me because I am a little bit nervous this evening, but I will do the best I can. I was in Girl Scouts when I was younger, and my daughter recently joined Girl Scouts a couple of years ago. She's a junior this year in fourth grade. And last year, I was presented with an opportunity to lead her troop, and it has been so awesome. So, this is something I've been kind of thinking about in the back of my mind for a few years, and I just finally had the courage to do this. So, it's been a lot of fun researching, and thank you to Jack and Paul for trusting me to do this and helping me. And we will get into it. The founder of Girl Scouts was Juliette Gordon Lowe. You may have heard that name before, especially if you've ever been involved with Girl Scouts. Juliette Gordon was born in Savannah, Georgia on October 31st, 1860. Both her parents came from pretty influential and wealthy families. So her and her 5 siblings grew up in the typical fashion of an elite Southern family. She attended numerous boarding schools as a teenager in both the North and the South, as her parents thought that would give her a more well-rounded education. However, she was not much of an academic. She was often getting into trouble. Her favorite things to do were hiking, exploring, playing tennis, all things which a finishing school typically does not encourage. So while she was encouraged to have that sophistication and grace of a highborn young woman, she was definitely not that. And her siblings often commented on her inability to keep track of time, her frequent experiments that often went awry, and her acts of kindness that typically resulted in good-natured disasters. She was a well-known animal lover, and she was often seen walking around with birds on her shoulder or a dog by her side. Her brother summed her up by calling her a brilliant eccentric, which is a pretty good summation of her. On December 21st, 1886, Juliette married a wealthy Englishman named William McKay Lowe. During the ceremony, a grain of rice got lodged in her ear as the people were throwing it, and she had to have it surgically removed. And as a result, she actually lost her hearing. Her ear was permanently damaged, and she lost her hearing and eventually completely became deaf in that ear. Due to William's wealth and Juliette's family's wealth, they split their time between England and Savannah. They had a home in Savannah and a estate in England. William eventually began spending more time away from home. He had a little bit of a gambling problem. He went on frequent long hunting trips and liked to splurge on expensive purchases. And meanwhile, Juliette was pretty independent, and she kind of went off on her own, doing her own trips, trying to find cures for her hearing loss. And she also suffered from ovarian cysts, which caused her to not be able to have children, which caused more issues between the two of them. So by 1901, it was pretty well known within their close family and friends circle, along with Juliette herself, that he had taken a mistress. So, of course, back in those days, divorce was very much unheard of, and so she didn't want to bring scandal to any of them, including her husband's mistress. So she stayed with some friends in London. She did later file for divorce on grounds of desertion. However, in 1905, William passed away from a seizure. And unbeknownst to Juliette, William had changed his will and left everything to his mistress. But luckily, Juliette had been really close with William's sisters, and they were not happy with how he had handled things. So they contested the will, and in the end, Juliette did end up with a modest monetary settlement and the house in Savannah. So here she was at the age of 45, no husband, no children. So she kind of had a eat, pray, love moment and began to find herself again. She traveled to France, Italy, Egypt, and India. She continued with her charitable work, which she had been doing since she was a young kid. She was very much into helping those less fortunate than her. And she started with her artwork again. She had always been very passionate about art. She was very good, and a lot of her pieces are now displayed at the Juliette Gordon Low birthplace in Savannah, which was her home. So you can see she drew, she sketched. There's a little suffragette sketch that she did. There's a whole thing of paper dolls that she designed. She sculpted these gates. When she lived in England, at some point, she took up metalsmithing and designed and made these gates that were hanging in the estate of hanging in their estate in England. At some point after she had passed away, they were brought back to America, and they are now at the Gordon Stone Memorial Park in Savannah. So these gates were made by Juliette Low, which I thought was pretty cool. And then you can see they have all kinds of her journals and letters. And this is a letter that she had written, and you can see the classic Girl Scout trefoil design that she had designed originally, got it copyrighted, and that became the design for the Girl Scouts. In 1911, she was at a party and she met a man named Robert Baden-Powell. Several years earlier, Baden-Powell had formed the Boy Scouts, the intention of training young men for military preparedness, but with the emphasis that the training should be fun. And during the formation of Boy Scouts, during the first year, it was quickly discovered that many of the sisters of these young boys were showing up to the meetings, sometimes disguised in their brothers' uniforms, sometimes just showing up as they were, saying, we want to do this too. And so Robert Baden-Powell talked to his sister Agnes, and they agreed that a group needed to be formed for these girls as well. And thus the Girl Guides of England were formed, and they were headed up by Agnes, and later on Robert Baden-Powell's wife Olive helped with that. Juliette was instantly in love with this idea. It was right up her alley, helping young girls, being outdoors. So she helped to start patrols in London and Scotland. And when she decided to return to Savannah, it was a no-brainer that she was going to bring this idea home with her. In March of 1912, Juliette forms the first American Girl Guide patrol with 18 girls from Savannah. Due to her extensive social connections and her sheer tenacity, the movement quickly spread, and after only a couple of years, the name was changed to Girl Scouts and the organization was incorporated. She got to enjoy about 15 years of her legacy and see it grow from 18 girls to 168,000 girls in 1927 when she passed away. She had developed cancer in 1923, but had kept it mostly hidden from her friends and family. She never allowed her ill health to slow her down. About a year before she died, less than a year before she died, in May of 1926, she realized one of her greatest dreams by hosting the 4th Annual International Conference, or as they like to call it, World Camp. And it was in the United States at Camp Edith Macy in New York. And Girl Scouts and Girl Guides from all over the world came to New York. And despite being in constant pain, Juliette was right there beside them. You can see here she's helping to plant a tree, and so she got to kind of live out a big dream of hers before she passed away on January 17th, 1927. And she passed away among family and friends in her Savannah home. So in 1912, as the Girl Scout movement was starting to expand throughout the South, the Knoxville YWCA tried to take advantage of this and form a Girl Scout movement. So they weren't affiliated with the actual Girl Scouts, but they wanted to kind of start their own scout group. Unfortunately, at the time, there was kind of a lack of organization and lack of leadership and not very much interest. So it didn't really pan out. However, a few years later, their junior department was reorganized and had under new leadership. and they attempted to do it again. And this time, over 75 girls registered and signed up. In 1916, between 1916 and 1917, there were approximately 12 lone troops within the Knoxville city limits. And again, lone troops were troops that were not affiliated with the national organization. They didn't pay dues, so they just kind of did their own thing. Because these lone troops were on their own, I wasn't able to find a lot of personal recollections of Girl Scouting during this time, but one that we do have is that of an Alice Heap. Oh, sorry, this is the lone troop, one of the lone troops in 1917. And Alice Heap, she joined Girl Scouts when she was approximately 16 years old. She was a Knoxville high school student, and she fondly remembered practicing flag signaling and participating in a couple of parades downtown. She dropped out of Girl Scouts in 1919 to focus on her education at the University of Tennessee, where she earned her master's degree in chemistry. However, she spoke fluent Spanish and spent 6 summers studying at the University of Mexico. She also spent a summer in Spain and a summer in Peru. So after moving around the South for a little bit, Alice came back to Knoxville and settled in as a Spanish teacher with the Knoxville school system. She served as president of the Teachers Honor Society of Delta Kappa Gamma and was a charter member of the Executive Women's Club, for which she also served as president several years later. In her return to Knoxville, she found her way back to Girl Scouting, first as a camp counselor and then eventually as a leader. And she spent the rest of her adult life working with the Girl Scouts. She was pretty well known within the organization. And in 1981, she was awarded the first annual Edith Lynn Heritage Award for her valuable service and for exemplifying the concepts of Girl Scouting throughout her daily life. She passed away in 1989 at the age of 87. In September of 1921, the Knoxville chapter of Community Service Council was formed. The National Community Service Council had been formed in 1919 and was created to assist American communities in making the leisure time of their citizens more valuable and expressive through community recreation. So in 1922, this Community Service Committee requested that a group be put together to assess the activity needs of young girls in Knoxville. And due to the success of Boy Scouting, which had been in Knoxville for several years before this, they decided to go ahead and go with Girl Scouts. And they applied for a charter from the National Girl Scout Council, so they would be affiliated with them. Mrs. J.R. McDowell was the chairman, and she eventually became the first commissioner of the council. On July 14th, 1922, an announcement appeared in the Knox News Sentinel that Girl Scouts were going to be formed in Knoxville. The Community Service Committee office received an immediate and huge response from girls who wanted to join a troop. Even though there were no officially trained leaders yet, the troops began to form all over the city. We're not really sure if lone troops just registered on their own. I'm assuming some probably went with new troops, but they all got registered, and during the 1922-23 membership year, there were 15 troops registered with the Knoxville Council. Because of this huge response, the next obvious step was to hold training courses for women aged 21 and older who were interested in becoming leaders. And thanks to the charter, the national headquarters sent a field worker down who held a week of classes at Second Presbyterian Church. In 1923, after only a year, the council decided to sever connections with the Knoxville's Community Service Committee. One of the reasons that helped fuel this decision was the creation of the United Way in Knoxville. One of their first beneficiaries was the Knoxville Girl Scouts, so they were able to get some extra funds and step away from the Community Service Committee. So before a girl could become an official member, she had to pass what was called the tenderfoot test. The girls had to recite the promise, law, motto, and slogan all by heart. They had to know the name of the current president, the governor of their state, and the head of her city or town government. They had to be able to tie 4 sailors' knots, perform some simple exercises and the tenderfoot drill. And then they had to promise to do a good turn daily for either her troop, school, home, or community. It is not quite so difficult to become a Girl Scout now. Now all you have to do is get on the computer and click which troop you want to be in, and you are in. In April of 1924, the recognition of Knoxville's first 2 Golden Eaglet Awards were announced. At the time, the Golden Eaglet was the highest award that a Girl Scout could earn. The first step to earning this award was that girls had to earn a series of badges and be tested on their competency of them by an expert in the field. And then the girls had to be recommended by their captain and approved by a local committee before their applications were sent to the national office. As you can see, there's been a few changes to how the award has looked over the years and what it's been called. It's currently known as the Gold Award today. And the girls have a minimum requirement of 80 hours that they need to spend working on it. So it's typically a girl will spend 1 to 2 years working on it, and they have to research a need in their community and then create a sustainable project that addresses that need. Knoxville's 2022 Gold Award winners, some of the projects involve creating a STEM program in an area that had underserved children, and then a lot of girls will do either a website, since it has to be sustainable, either a website or a children's book of some sort, where they've done it on mental health, learning disabilities, food allergies, anything that gives them passion that they want to share. So going back to the 20s, one of the first experiences that Knoxville girls asked for was outdoor camping. And in 1923, the council's first camp was held at Camp Indian Mound in Calderwood, Tennessee, which is on the border of Monroe and Blount counties. The land and cottages were owned by the Aluminum Company of America, who had loaned them to the council. And 98 girls and 20 leaders had a highly successful camping experience. So this is some of the girls at Camp Calderwood, and this is their morning jerks or exercises that they had to do. The following summer, they went to Camp Juliet Low, which is in Cloudland, Georgia, and they actually got to meet Juliet Low. She went to that camp, and so they got to meet her, and here's just some pictures of them. So with the success of Camp Indian Mound and the expenses that it took to travel to Camp Juliet Low, it was quickly decided that the Knoxville Council needed a camp of their own. So towards the end of 1923, Mabel Imes, who was a member of the council at the time, discussed the need with her father, who happened to be Colonel Townsend. W.B. Townsend was a lumber merchant from Pennsylvania, and he was responsible for bringing the Little River Lumber Company and Railroad to Tennessee in 1900. So at the time, he owned hundreds of acres of land in the Smoky Mountains, and he was wanting to help. He was eager to help. He told Mabel to choose a site that she liked best, and after multiple hikes and some hikes with some other women and people on the Knoxville Council, they found a spot of land. She described it as a cleared out little valley surrounded by yellow poplars, and it was located on the river about 5 miles above what is now Townsend. So Townsend gifted 11 acres to the council, and over the years he continued to contribute and help with the camp. He often was there making repairs, and he liked to go and visit and hang out with his girls. He called them his girls. So named after Townsend's wife, who had passed away on New Year's Eve in 1923, Camp Margaret Townsend opened in 1925. The first item that was listed under personal equipment to bring in the brochures was a good disposition, and I can vouch that that is still very true today. When you go to Girl Scout camp, you definitely need to have a good attitude, because you never know what to expect. There were very few roads to travel yet, so the campers actually rode in on the logging train, and several years later, a bus was fitted with train wheels that went up to the camp, brought the girls up to the camp. Camp provided platforms for tents, There was a recreation dining hall, a kitchen, latrines, and a clinic. And something I thought was interesting that they don't really do today, there was a commissary on the campsite, which was opened after dinner, and all the girls who attended camp were required to deposit spending money, and they were allowed to write check each day. So, but they could not exceed 10 cents, so they wouldn't let them spend like crazy. But they were able to write checks, and it taught them banking skills. And it also provided a small profit for the camp as well, for camp repairs and stuff. For girls that were over the age of 18, there was also the option of pioneer camp. There was a small campsite located about 1.5 miles on the other side of a ridge from Camp Margaret Townsend. And they really roughed it. They slept on the ground. They cooked 3 meals a day over the fire, hiked every day. And if they attended Pioneer Camp, they would perform all the activities that they needed to earn their Pioneer Merit Badge. When the Smoky Mountain National Park was established in 1934, the land that Camp Margaret Townsend was on was not immediately part of the park. However, in 1938, the National Park Service started inquiring about purchasing the property, and the council was hesitant, but in 1940, condemnation proceedings were brought against them in order to expedite the sale. So the Knoxville Girl Scout Council met with the Department of the Interior's National Park Service, and a deal was reached in which the council would receive $4,700 for the land, and they would get a 20-year lease at $1 per year payment. In early 1950s, the camp was packed to the brim at every session. There were often waiting lists reaching 170 plus girls per session. So in September of 1951, the council began working with TVA to see what land might be available for a new camp. And of course, at this time, their 20 years was starting to come up. And in 1953, they requested an extension on the lease, but the National Park Service would not extend the lease. And so the camp was closed in December of 1959. The site that the camp was on became the Great Smoky Mountains Institute at Tremont, which of course is still there today. While plans and construction of Camp Margaret Townsend were underway, the girls were able to attend numerous day camps held around Knoxville, and some of these locations will probably sound familiar, especially if you've been on our Zooms before. There was the Baum Farm, and that was in what is now Westmoreland Heights, the backyard and swimming pool of the E.C. Mahan home, and of course the bird preserve at the home of Harry and Alice Imes. Speaking of the Imes family, it is difficult to discuss the early years of Knoxville Girl Scouting without mention of one of their names. They were very prominent in the Girl Scouting movement. Starting with Mrs. Alice Imes, she served as a council member and eventually chairman on the Knoxville Council. Alice and her husband, H.P. Imes, were prominent Knoxvillians who owned 20 acres of land along the Tennessee River. They were true nature lovers and adventurers, and they raised their daughters to be the same. You can see these are just some photos of them on their property growing up. Their sister-in-law Mabel was married to HP's sister, and she of course was responsible for helping get Camp Margaret Townsend started. And both of them were staff members when the camp first started during the first few years. Mabel ended up becoming commissioner of the council in 1926. However, it was short-lived because the following year she was selected for the National Board of Directors of the National Girl Scouts. And in 1929, she was responsible for hosting the Dixie Regional Conference at Whittle Springs Hotel, which was just south of Fountain City. And 40 Girl Scout leaders from 5 different states met for 3 days, and they discussed everything from finances and camps to guiding girls through their cantankerous years. which I'm sure was a discussion, and a discussion we still have today, actually, as a leader. The next generation of Imes women began scouting early. In 1923, the oldest Imes daughter, Elizabeth, attended Camp Indian Mound as a member of the Opeechee tribe patrol, and from there, Girl Scouts basically became her life. In January of 1930, she took over as director of the Knoxville Council, and in 1933, she moved to Middle Tennessee when she was offered the position of the director for the Nashville Girl Scouts. She went on to work in Winston-Salem Girl Scout offices. She worked at the Girl Scout of America National Office in New York City for a little bit, and finally with the Girl Scouts in Trentwood, New Jersey, before she retired. Her sisters, Jo, Martha, and Mary, were all just as involved. They all attended numerous camp sessions each summer. Jo graduated from UT and was a tireless advocate for state parks and conservation. Martha, seen here on her wedding day at Imes, she went to UT as well and graduated with a degree in home economics and early childhood development. She ended up teaching home ec at Maryville High School for more than 20 years. And Mary Imes was considered a true Girl Scout in every way. And she was only a few badges short of becoming a Golden Eaglet when in 1932, at the age of 16, she was involved in an automobile accident and died. In 1939, Mr. and Mrs. Imes donated a chunk of their property to the Girl Scouts to create a camp. And a contest was held for the girls to name it, and the winner was Camp Mary Imes as a tribute to her memory. Camp Mary Imes continued as both a day camp and a summer camp until the late 1970s. This is a little sketch of how to get there. There's a flag ceremony at Camp Mary Imes. Tribute stone to Juliet Lowe, which, Paul, remind me, that is still there today?
Yeah, it's on the property called where West Williamswood, which is kind of a faux castle that's on the old campgrounds. Still there, absolutely. But it was about 10 years ago when I saw it.
Thank you. So, along with most things, World War II defined Girl Scouts throughout the 40s. From the redesign of their uniforms due to zipper restrictions, to the uptick in community service through the sale of war bonds, helping with scrap metal drives, Red Cross work. And then, of course, there began to be shortages in things such as flour and sugar and other baking supplies. So there were already cookie sales, and we will actually get into that later. But because of these supply shortages, they had to come up with a new fundraising idea, and they started creating calendars. However, Knoxville Girl Scouts had actually been creating their own local homemade calendars to sell as extra income since the 1930s. So whether or not Knoxville Scouts did better at calendar sales, I don't know, but it would be interesting to find those numbers and see, since we had been selling them longer. Of course, World War II brought about a massive change in East Tennessee with the creation of Oak Ridge. In October of 1943, Oak Ridge schools opened within the secret city, and with 850 students from 48 states and more arriving daily, Elise Novy, who was a teacher, thought it would be a good idea to start a Girl Scout troop or council within the secret city. So she was given permission to begin a Girl Scout troop, and all it took was a phone call over a secured line to the Knoxville Council president and General Graves, who was in charge of the secret city at the time. And then, of course, approval from J. Edgar Hoover himself. So no big deal, just a little phone call. But she had success, and in November, 2 troops were established. They had to be registered directly through the national office, and only their first names. They were only allowed to give their first names for security reasons. There were 41 troops in Oak Ridge with 783 girls, which prompted an Oak Ridge Council to be formed. Of course, that August, the atomic bomb was dropped, and the secret city was no longer a secret. With the war over, the girls were allowed to, one of their other restrictions was they were not allowed to have fundraisers. So with the war ending, the Oak Ridge Council decided to hold their first fundraiser, and it was a 2-day laundry sale. They dry cleaned and sold all the laundry that was left by the suddenly departed army. And that October, they were allowed to start selling cookies. They were allowed to participate in their first cookie sales. Troop 69 at Oak Ridge has always been a prestigious troop over the years, especially through the 70s. They have received numerous accolades and have created lasting change to their community. In 1972, they were awarded the Walter Donald Ross Trophy at a national convention in Dallas, and this was the first time a troop in the United States had won this award. It was given to troop for outstanding service. And the Oak Ridge Children's Museum was started in 1973 as a project by this troop. And of course, it is still there today. It was originally opened in the former Jefferson Junior High School, and then a year later moved to the Highland View Elementary School, which is where it is today. The 40s also brought significant steps in the diversity of the Knoxville Council. When Juliet formed Girl Scouts, she wanted it to be for all girls, regardless of race, religion, economic background. However, due to state and local laws and customs of the time, most, but not all, Girl Scout units were originally segregated. In 1924, a woman named Josephine Groves Holloway started some Black troops in Nashville, and those were the first Black troops in the South. Inquiries began being made regarding the creation of an African American troop in Knoxville in 1936. There was a woman named Miss Nani Taylor, which I wasn't able to find a lot of information about, but she would relentlessly attend council meetings. She would regularly make inquiries on the matter. She wrote to the National Council, but their reply was that the matter needed to be left to the discretion of her local council. Unfortunately, at the time, the Knoxville Council unanimously decided that they were not going to sponsor or promote any scouting amongst African Americans. This was not really an uncommon answer for the time in the South, but over the next several years, they kind of ignored the problem, kicked the can down the road. And in 1943, a couple of the council members kind of pushed the issue because at the time there were 21 councils within 2 different southern regions that were offering it, and they said we need to make a decision on this. So they got in contact with Mr. Charles Kanzler and his daughter Willard Kanzler Daves. They were both very prominent citizens and civil rights advocates within the Knoxville African American community. And they asked him if he would help to gather any women or girls that were interested. And in May of 1943, there was a training course held for potential leaders and committee members, and 28 African American women finished the course and became troop leaders. 4 troops were organized in the newly developed housing projects Austin Homes and College Homes in East Knoxville, and supplies and uniforms were donated from the National Council and several of the Knoxville troops around the area. 1945 also brought the first day camp for African American troops. Camp Willard Daves was held at the Knoxville College campus, and a couple of years later, a lease on an overnight campsite was requested from the TVA, and 19 acres along Fort Loudon Lake in the Singleton area, which is kind of the Louisville area now, north of the airport, Camp Singleton was created. In 1947, the Oak Ridge Council was denied permission by the U.S. Army to hold an indoor integrated play day. So the Girl Scouts simply held it outside, and it was a huge success. And so the following year, they held their first integrated day camp. That same year, Miss Willard Daves, who the day camp was named after, became the first African American woman to be elected to the Knoxville Girl Scout Board of Directors. By the 1950s, the National Girl Scouts had begun significant efforts to desegregate all the Girl Scout camps. Camp Shantuck, which is in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, was the first camp to be desegregated, and it is still there today. This is from their Facebook page, and they still hold camps and stuff there today. As the country began to change throughout the 50s, so did the Girl Scouts. A new modern uniform was introduced. Lots of bylaws and structures began to be revised with the changing times. The Office of Civil Defense, which had been established in 1941 to coordinate civilian defense efforts, started to begin their educational effort in light of the Cold War. And in 1952, a resolution was adopted by council and the board that all scouts would participate in civilian defense using the skills that they had learned in first aid, childcare, home nursing, and camping. Knoxville Senior Girl Scouts from Troop 1 were the first group in the nation to become civil defense watchers in 1953. They were trained to watch the skies, and 20 girls received diplomas at the Air Defense Center. In 1955, the National Council began their Green Umbrella campaign, which was basically to consolidate councils, bring lone troops into a council structure, streamline program delivery throughout the country. The Knoxville Board of Directors had actually been looking into this and discussing having a larger East Tennessee Council since 1949. In November of 1956, the Knoxville Girl Scout Council became the headquarters for the area council of 9.5 counties. They decided to name the council Tanasi, which was the name of the Cherokee Indian town from which the name Tennessee is thought to have been derived. 8 more counties ended up joining in 1965 when the Highland Rim Council was dissolved. So the first annual meeting of the Tanasi Girl Scout Council was held in April of 1957 at Church Street United Methodist Church. As I mentioned earlier, in the early 50s, Camp Margaret Townsend had become very popular, lots of waiting lists, and the council had at the time contacted TVA to try and find a new plot of land for a new camp, but that original 1951 request didn't really result in anything. So in 1953, the council tried again, and TVA suggested a tract of land on Norris Lake in the Andersonville area. And so after several years of surveying the land and negotiations, a deal was reached, and they were able to purchase the land using mostly cookie money. They only had to take out a small loan. Most of the camp was actually bought with cookie money in 1955. In 1957, a pioneer practice camp was held for older girls, and that's what this is, the pictures here. There was no platforms for the tents, no buildings, no anything yet. It was just the land. So they got in their canoes and camped out. The camp opened for everyone in 1960. And at first it was only accessible by boat or canoe, but construction on a road to the camp began in 1964. With the family dynamic changing, Tanasi obliged by offering family camp sessions. All the families had to do was bring their personal items and bedding, and everything else was provided. The change in family dynamic also brought about a program called the Doodads. It was introduced in 1974, and it was designed to introduce fathers into Girl Scouting. Naturally, husbands of the council staff members were among the first registered doodads in Knoxville, but the program flourished. I couldn't find when it actually stopped being called doodads, but I do know there are a lot of fathers that are very involved now in Girl Scouts. Small changes to Camp Tanasi occurred over the years just to keep the camp updated. But in 1982, of course, there were some very big changes in the anticipation of the World's Fair. Vast improvements were made at the camp. They added a lot more tent platforms, bathrooms, and such. And it was a good thing they did, because the camp ended up having 10,811 visitors from 42 states and Puerto Rico. One girl remembered the great package deal that was offered. She said, "My family rented a platform tent, enjoyed the breakfast at camp, and toted our prepared box lunches onto the bus shuttle that took us to the fairgrounds. We enjoyed the trip and the fair." Other Girl Scouts from around the world came to the fair. Instead of going to summer camp, they chose to spend their cookie money on coming to the fair and stayed at Tanasi. This is actually from a newspaper in Athens, Georgia. These girls came, and there was, of course, a special badge for Girl Scouts who attended the fair. However, as a coordinator, it is well known to me that big events usually do not happen without a little bit of drama. According to the Girl Scouts, they were promised by fair executives that approximately 50 girls would be allowed to raise the flags every other day through the duration of the fair, and they would then be given free admission that day. However, fair officials state that this was never the case, and the only discussions they ever had were that the Girl Scouts would participate in some way. So after about a month of discussions and further planning for the fair, the Girl Scouts were asked if they would like to provide one troop each Saturday morning throughout the fair to stand on the side while the flags were being raised. The Girl Scouts were not happy with this offer, and they refused, with the mindset that the fair executives had broken a promise to them and the girls of Knoxville. So the Girl Scouts actually did not participate in the World's Fair in any official capacity. The council did encourage girls to go with their families, and they claimed that they still supported the fair itself, but they were not going to participate as a council. So that was the drama of the World Fair. Throughout the 90s, the use of personal computers grew, and the Girl Scouts introduced a technology badge, and in 1996 launched the first website for the Girl Scouts. In 2000, the Girl Scout Research Institute produced a study showing that preteen girls were maturing a lot faster mentally and physically, but not as emotionally than previous generations. So the result was a decade-long effort to revamp the Girl Scout program, address the needs of modern girls. And they focused on things such as mental health issues and STEM programs, as STEM was becoming a bigger thing in the 2000s. At the same time, it was becoming apparent that many of the 315 councils around the country were not thriving. So the National Council had another realignment begin, and on October 21st, 2008, the Tanasi Council was merged with two other councils in the area, and we became the Girl Scouts of Southern Appalachian. Today, this council serves over 5,000 girls in 46 counties. There's leadership offices in Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Johnson City. The leadership office in Knoxville, if you have not been, has a little museum called Daisy's Place Museum, and thanks to them, that's where I got a lot of my information from and the archives there. There are 3 camps within our council. There is Camp Tanasi in Andersonville, Camp Wildwood in Johnson City, and Camp Adahi in Cloudland, Georgia. As the world quickly changes around us, the Girl Scouts strive to keep girls on top. While staying connected with nature and interacting with the great outdoors is the basis of Girl Scouts, girls are now given the opportunity to explore and expand their knowledge with programs in pretty much any field you can think of. This just happened to come in my mailbox the other day. It was from the council, just all the numbers from 2022, so I thought I'd add that in. And of course, Girl Scouts is so much more, but you cannot talk about them without the C word. Cookies actually started to be sold in 1917, which was way earlier than I thought that it was going to be. But the mistletoe troop of Muskogee, Oklahoma, baked cookies in their homes and decided to sell them in their high school cafeteria as a service project. And little did they know that it was going to become a worldwide phenomenon. By July of 1922, their basic sugar cookie recipe had been shared with councils all around the country. You can see this was from a Girl Scout magazine at the time. Sharing the recipe. Girl Scout Council in Philadelphia took cookie sales to the next level in 1934, and they became the first council to sell commercially baked cookies. Following year, the council in New York went a step further, and they purchased the cutout of the trefoil, and that's what we still have today. In 1936, the National Girl Scout Organization began the process of licensing the first commercial bakers to produce cookies, and those would be sold nationwide. In Knoxville, Swan's Bakery, which was on Magnolia Avenue at the time, offered to bake the cookies. And after a few years of shortages during World War II, as we talked about earlier, in 1948, cookie sales were going crazy, and there were a total of 29 bakers that were licensed to bake these cookies. So they, at the time, they were kind of all over the place with the flavors. They still had the classic trefoils, but they were starting to try other flavors. In the 50s, the rise of department stores and shopping malls began, and girls took full advantage of that, selling cookies at tables, selling them to shoppers. By 1966, the cookie variety was beginning to grow even more. However, the best sellers were chocolate mint, shortbread, and peanut butter sandwich cookies, all of which we still have today. Over the next decade, the National Council began streamlining the number of bakers to ensure lower prices and product consistency. And by the early 1990s, there were only 2 licensed bakers that supplied Girl Scout cookies, and they are the bakers that we still have today. You may or may not know, there's a few differences between the bakers. So what cookies you get depends on where you live. So we are with Little Brownie Bakers, and we get the s'mores, and our thin mints are a little bit different, and we have lemon ups instead of lemonade. However, in 2014, the digital cookie website was introduced, and you are now able to buy cookies online. So if you want one of those other flavors, you just need to find a Girl Scout and get online and order them. It's a great tool. It helps the girls sell more cookies, obviously, but it also teaches them lessons about online marketing, app usage, and e-commerce. And if they all have to go through a training program on the safety of using the internet. In 2020, Girl Scouts showed their motto of being prepared when they had to revamp things due to coronavirus. They came up with the idea to do drive-through cookie booths. And of course, they utilized the website a lot more. And in case you have not heard yet, our new cookie this year will be the Raspberry Rally. It is only going to be available online, though. So if you're looking for them at storefronts this year, you're going to have to actually know a Girl Scout in order to get them, unfortunately. But it's basically a Thin Mint, only raspberry flavored instead of mint flavored. This is really only highlights Girl Scouting, the history of it. There's so much more. If you are interested in learning more, there's the Memories for a Lifetime book that you can get at the Daisy's Place Museum. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Nicole. Good show. That was pretty fascinating. I'm interested in a few things. One is the Swan's Bakery, partly because that building is still there on Magnolia and is being redeveloped. Was that just for the local market, or was it a larger market that they did that?
I believe it was just for the local market.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any questions at all? Thanks again, Nicole. That was fascinating. I was really very interested.